Thank you for tuning in to the Island Treasures podcast. We value the insights shared by our guests and host, but it's important to note that their personal experiences are intended to inform and encourage, and not to replace professional, legal, or medical advice. With that, we are ready for today's exciting episode. Welcome to Island Treasures, a place for caregivers to hear encouragement from other caregivers who, by sharing their experiences, offer helpful information and resources for your caregiving journey. I am your host and caregiver consultant, Alison Van Schie from beautiful Vancouver Island in British Columbia, Canada. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to let you know that Island Treasures is set up to receive fan mail. So you can text the podcast directly through the link at the bottom of the show notes. Today's guest is a fellow Canadian who is a best-selling author and expert in the senior living industry. She is a problem solver by nature and well-versed in facilitating difficult conversations, which is a great asset in her work with seniors and their families. Her skills came in handy for her own family's caregiving situation. In 2014, she founded Tea and Toast to help seniors and their families navigate their elder care journey. To hear more from my guest, join me now as I welcome Amy Friesen. So welcome, Amy. I am delighted to have you as a guest on the Island Treasures podcast today.
Thanks, Allison. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah. It's been fun getting to know you and hearing from Debbie Compton initially on Tea and Toast, which is your company, which we'll hear more about as we progress as well in this conversation. But let's start with your caregiving story.
Sure. So I caregive as a professional, and that's what I do in my professional life. But my personal caregiving story came down to my father-in-law. And we were at a point through COVID. He lives about 8 hours away. We weren't seeing him very much. His health was failing, and we just couldn't help enough from a distance. So we had brought the conversation up multiple times, how about you move this way? Because there was no family or anything in that area. How about you move this way? It was kind of always, no, not ready. No, thank you. And then after this long stint and the health change, I described it in my chapter in the Caregivers Advocate, where I was sitting with my husband at the computer, but we were on speakerphone, and he was going to bring it up with his dad again, and he was wringing his hands as my husband does in nervousness, and I kind of just whispered, like, do you want me to take over? Because again, I'm a professional as well. And he said yes. And so I said, Dad, we'd really like to have you here. We'd really like to bring you into our home to live with us. You would get to see your granddaughter more. We can care for you more here. We can assist. There's family. And then he took 3 seconds this time and said, yeah, let's do it. And so we went through a process of getting him downsized, moving here, and everything was really positive, and he was getting here. And then when we went to pick him up, he was a bit sicker than we expected, unfortunately. So my husband stayed there, and I came back with my daughter, and they were about, I think, 2 weeks. And then 2 weeks they came here, and he got here on the weekend, and he had passed away within 3 days. So very unfortunate. It's even I can feel my tears coming up, because it was, I was getting into the zone of being a more on-demand caregiver, more, in my space. And the thoughts about him, seeing us more, being with my daughter more, just being a presence, having, pops closer. And so it was a pretty big blow to us when that happened. But it was just really interesting. I learned through that, everybody has their own skill set, and timing is so interesting for people, right? Like we've tried to have this talk about moving multiple times, and then finally kind of got through. But it's interesting because I find in that situation, I can go back to a lot of my clients where they kind of wait too long. And that's where I felt that we got to, is that even though I'm a professional, I can't move the clock any faster. I can't make people do things. And so that's where a lot of people get to, is that they just wait too long and then they finally go for it. And then it's just not what it could have been. So it was trying, but it did teach me a lot.
Well, I think it's going to teach the listeners a lot too, but you didn't realize that you'd waited too long. And you were just like cheering because yes, he said, yes, yes, I'll move with you guys. This will be great. But then you found that he wasn't as well as you thought he had been, and that's tragic that he passed away so quickly.
I feel like, I guess we didn't realize we waited too long, but we waited longer than we wanted to. Um, and to be honest, he didn't know what was making him sick, and we didn't know until he was admitted to hospital that he had this super aggressive cancer that nobody knew about, and he literally passed away like almost immediately in hospital. So it was a pretty wild ride, but one of the things that I did take from it, which I encourage anybody to do really, is to take the pictures. And there's a picture of Pops sitting on the bed watching TV, having lunch, and my daughter crawled in and had lunch with him. And I took the picture, even though it seems like a lot of people can't get their head around, is it kind of morbid? Is it not? And I look back at that and it's, she hadn't seen him for years because of COVID. And so we have that picture. And,
Mm.
it was that little bit of time. It wasn't as much as we wanted. You're gonna make me cry now, but yeah, you can take a lesson from a lot of things in life.
That story is so powerful though, Amy. Like I knew your story, but I for some reason didn't realize he'd passed away and so quickly.
Yeah.
And you would have hyped yourselves up. You would have made plans to adapt the house for when he came to live with you. And you would have had all this going on in your minds
Mm.
just to have that taken away with his passing, not to mention the loss of your loved one.
Yeah. Well, and we did have like grab bars installed and different things. We moved furniture everywhere. Like the whole thing was in motion. And I think that something that affected me more than I knew it would, and more that I can explain to, my husband, because he operates differently than I do. But, where we live, we don't have any family support. Even my parents are hours away. And to have some family support coming was, really really interesting to me to, he could have taught my daughter art, and he could have taught all this stuff, right? All these like kind of broken dreams at the end of the day. And it sounds, sad, and it is sad, but it's one of those things, it's a grieving process of that, right? He passed away, there's a grieving process but there's also a grieving process when your life doesn't go the way you thought it was going to go, which is what a lot of people feel, especially with folks who have memory loss, right? And it's like that's just not how they expected their life to go. And the loved ones are taking care of them, and that's not how the loved ones expected their life to go. And so there's a grieving on multiple different levels.
Yeah. My family grew up without anyone close by as well. So I do understand the change that would have been facing your family to have someone, a close family member, come and live with you, and to have that him breathe a different dimension into your daughter's life. Like our
Yeah.
kids never had their grandparents close by, and that would have been awesome to have that energy, that generation making an impression on them. So yeah, I can see the grieving that went on at a different level.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I work with seniors. I've worked with seniors for 20 years. And so I just like to be around older folks. And so that also would have been really nice as well. But life is, right? And you can only do so much, and you learn from everything, like I said. So it's been an interesting whirlwind.
Yeah. So that's your personal caregiving story.
That is,
And
yep.
that's pretty recent as well.
Yeah, it was a couple of years, two years ago.
So take me back to what started the interest with working with older people and the career that you chose.
Sure. Yeah. So when I was going through school, university and college, I wasn't finding things that were really clicking. I wasn't, to my best knowledge, I've never been the person that dreamt of being a firefighter or a nurse, or like, I don't know. People ask me and I don't know what that was for me. And I didn't know until I was almost through university, which would have been about 5 years from college to university. And there was a course called Psychology of Aging that really interested me. I really liked my psychology courses. And it really interests me. And then I found this little niche of the retirement industry. Um, and so I went in activities, and then that was pretty short stint. And then I was in marketing from there on, and basically helping people find their next best home, right? So I'd actually given it thought recently. I was doing some coaching, and I gave it thought, and the trick was to ask why I'm doing it, but do it 7 times, answer the question 7 times. And by the time I got done to the 7th time, my why, which has always been strong, but I wasn't clear, was based on my nanny who I lost when I was 15, my grandma. And she also died of cancer. And it was, as a 15-year-old, I didn't have the power to do anything. I couldn't help her do anything. I couldn't help any, I'm 15, like, what am I going to do? And so that's always fueled me, her as a human being and her impact in my life. But not until I did a little bit deeper digging was to be able to be helpful and to help people through these types of transitions in what my expertise are. And when I worked in the retirement homes, I worked in the homes almost 10 years. And then I've been running Tea and Toast for 10 years. And honestly, the homes that any of the homes really, you come in and you're surrounded by 100 grandparent types, right? And it was joyful. It was nice to be around. They took an interest in you as a human. They wanted to know if you were getting married or if you were having a baby or all that stuff. And it was nice to be around. So I think that's what drew me in general, but also because I didn't really have any grandparent figures anymore as well.
So you're seeing 100 nannies as you're walking in. That's
Yeah.
hilarious.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the 7 why, like the 7 questions that you ask yourself why? Are you answering a different answer each time then? Or are you just trying to figure out what's in your brain?
Yeah, so it's a way to figure out what's in your brain, and you go down a level. So, why do I run this business? And then you answer, oh, because I want to have a good life for me and my family, for instance. And then you say, okay, why do I want to have a good life for me and my family? And you go down and you do this 7 times. I couldn't tell you, I have it written down somewhere, but I couldn't tell you exactly my 7. But it was interesting because when you get past like 4 and 5, then you actually get into the depth of it, which is really interesting to see that like 7's the number that you're supposed to do.
So you're exploring your answer to your why questions with a why question.
That's right.
I love that. Oh,
Yeah, it
I'm
really worked well.
gonna spend some time with my brain after this. Why? Why
Careful, it can
indeed?
get dangerous.
Well, you know what? At this stage in my life, I don't know. Maybe I'll embrace danger. It's about
Yeah.
time. It's about time. Yeah. So, Tea and Toast. Tell me about the name of your business.
Yeah, so naming a business is really difficult. It's really hard. I went through a number of them trying to find the vibe I wanted. I wasn't even 100% sure when I named it Tea and Toast because you don't know until people start responding to it. Um, and so I named it Tea and Toast because there's something called Tea and Toast syndrome. And so it's a couple different reasons. One, if you're an adult child and your loved ones are eating tea and toast for multiple meals a day because it's easy and comfortable, then it kind of flags a nutrition issue for people to start paying attention to. And then on the other side, if people come across our name that are seniors or anybody in general, it's kind of that comfort food, right? So that's a comfortable name. Somebody recently said, also, I was on another interview and they said, also, it's like spilling the tea on, what are the good options in retirement living? We're spilling the tea, which was kind of interesting as well. But it's been good because people, so they often tell us, we had a couple of options, although there's not very many of us as navigators, but we had a couple of options and I saw your name and that's where we went. So people have that instant connection. I kind of say, if you know, like if it hits you that way, it's just like you're in the demographic of what we can help, like our business can help with, right? So people really like it, which is great.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of the syndrome before I spoke to you the first time,
Hmm.
but I certainly relate to the comfort aspect of tea and toast. That's definitely my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
So I could see why it attracts people. And you're right, the demographic is there. So what a brilliant idea. What a brilliant name.
I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah, yeah.
You never know.
No, you never know. Yeah, I like choosing my business name as well. Like I had three choices. Alongside was just what I wanted to convey. I wanted to come alongside folks. I wanted to not walk in front of them, not walk behind them, but walk with them. And yeah, it takes reflection to come up with that right name.
A lot of reflection.
Mhm. So, how did you meet Debbie Compton, and how did it come about that you wrote the chapter? Let's talk about the chapter as well. So I'm giving you multiple layers to answer here, but sorry for that. But there's so much in that chapter that I would really like you to share. But yeah, how did you meet Debbie?
Yeah, so I was working with another colleague in BC, and I think somehow they got connected. And so she connected me to Debbie. And so I started talking to Debbie about this, and I pitched her an idea. I tend to so a lot of the ideas and presentation stuff, there's not a lot of people that do what I do. So it's like, I feel like my chapter, all the chapters are great, but I feel like my chapter is just a little bit different than everybody's because I'm always talking about just something a little bit different. So the chapter is about how to have the talk essentially with your loved ones, how to open up communication, the different types of talks and why to have them. And so we really dive a little bit into it in this chapter. I explore it more in the book that I'm releasing called Breadcrumbs in October. I explore it even more there. And we also have some courses that we talk about it in because the thing about it is that elder care talks, I call them the talk because they're still the talk. They're super awkward. Nobody wants to have them. And for people in my demographic, with young children and then their parents are aging, we're probably going to be on the cusp of having the talks, the birds and the bees, and the talks of elder care. And so we're all sorts of awkward here. And really just to tell people, it's not helpful for anybody to hide your head in the sand. You need to get these talks out. You need to make sure that things are being covered properly so that there's no guesswork because you really don't want to be guessing when people are in crisis. Because if your loved one as a senior goes in crisis, you as a caregiver are in crisis too. And then everybody has to think on top of that. So let's plan some extra of that first.
Yeah. So how did you become so wise?
I I hear a lot of stories.
Yeah.
I'm a problem solver by nature. And this is just where my expertise are, where I really enjoy spending time in the space. And so I like to find answers. And so just over the last 20 years, I've just heard, and our team's heard a lot of stories. And what's interesting is that although the stories are personal, if you take a step back and you look at them professionally, there's only a couple of buckets that everybody ends in, right? The future moves where my parents aren't on board, but the kid wants to be on board, the kid from afar and the caregiver here, and there's like sibling problems. There's a couple of them, right? And so it's like once you can start identifying, which is what I teach my team to do as well, it's like everybody's holistically treated, for their story, and we listen to what they are. But the strategies behind what we do, there's only so many because they all kind of fall in certain buckets. And so that's how we can help people is really identifying what's important to them and hearing their story and then going forward and trying to give them strategies and help them plan that out their future for whichever way they want to do it.
Yeah. So hearing their story is paramount to knowing who they are so that you can personalize it, customize it, but also knowing how to broach the subject. So like with your husband, you asked him, "Do you need me to help with this?" You knew how to delicately or appropriately ask your father-in-law the question he needed to be asked.
Well, and it also depends on too, like the way that your personality is, your disposition. I come at things with a sense of humor. So although this field of things is stressful and overwhelming and whatnot, people, as far as I can tell, I haven't been told otherwise, but people enjoy the fact that I can come and lighten it up because I'm knowledgeable. I can get them to where they need. I get their answers they need, but I can also crack a joke and lighten up the mood because that's just my personality. So it's the same with my father-in-law. I just got on the phone with him and said, "All right, Ken, I'm going to give it to you straight because you know I do this all day long." And then I just gave it to him because that's our relationship. It was we were straight shooters and I added some humor and he knows what I do for work. So and that's how I encourage people to have their conversations too. It's, it doesn't always have to be doom and gloom. Yes, the conversations are heavy and they're awkward, but if you have a personality that can find humor, for instance, then there's definitely spaces in there to have humor because awkwardness is humorous at times, right? It's like I put in that book that when my dad, he cut off his thumb and he in just a sawing accident, he went and he got it all fixed and he's okay now. But mom said, I'm not going to wipe your butt. We're going to get a bidet. And it, is that the part that you were
That
laughing
may have
at?
been the part that I laughed out loud at, because yes, how practical.
That's the thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, so it's, practical, it lightens the mood, it takes care of the problem. There's
And your
just,
mom knew her limits.
that's right. And which is important, which is we also teach caregivers, right? You don't have to be all to everyone. If you don't want to be a caregiver, that's acceptable as well. And, problem solve to figure out what's going to support your loved one, but also it doesn't have to be you.
Yeah. And know your boundaries and what's your
Yeah.
tipping point. Like what's one thing you cannot do and don't do it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But I think also knowing so much, knowing about what the options are and going into the situation or going into the questioning, knowing what the answers are really helps. So for someone who doesn't know what all the options are, they could really benefit from talking to someone like yourself to help them with broaching the subject and asking the questions. Because I think, you can say, Dad, I know you're really not doing well at home, but not knowing what the options are. Like you had an option to bring him to live with you. There
Mhm.
are other options with assisted living or home care, like bringing people in, but you knew what they were, whereas other people fresh to caregiving or perhaps on the brink of caregiving don't know what they all are.
Yeah, I would say that both sides happen actually. There's a lot of people that don't know what the options are and they're really lost and they just need someone to really highlight what that looks like. And then there's other people that have done a search or look through it and they've literally contacted everyone, right? So there's people that look for retirement living, for instance, and they've contacted 20 homes and then they find us and they've confused themselves, right? Because it's just too much. It's too many homes. We wouldn't even do that, right? Like that's why we narrow it down for people. And so I think it's important for people to understand, like, know your limits, and accept that types of help. Like there's professionals for everything, right? And it's, you can take it on, but most people who take on what we do, like the searching of retirement residents and whatnot, have been taking leaves from their jobs or doing it during the day while they're supposed to be working or adding it to their night schedules or whatnot. And so we just don't have the time in the day to do this. And then even when people narrow it down, we still get calls saying, I narrowed it down to this home, but I don't even know if this is the right home. Right. And so it's like, it seems like they're not getting any further ahead. They're putting in all of the energy and effort to do the search, but they're not getting much further ahead from doing it on their own.
Plus, they're subjective, they're emotionally attached.
Yeah.
Whereas hiring someone or consulting with someone, you get that removed objectivity, and that's really helpful, even
Yeah.
though the emotions are still there, more so on their part, and more so are we care on our side. But I think that objectivity can really help. with the decision making. And you're talking about a complete overwhelm, like they're completely overwhelmed.
Well, we can also share with them because we have a track record, we can share with them like, hey, this is really usual. This is super normal. Like what you're going through, the ups and downs you're dealing with, like there's a lot of things, like I said, are, they're in their own buckets, right? It's very usual. Most caregivers feel like they're alone and they're the only ones dealing with any of this. Most caregivers feel like when they're dealing with the hospital, they don't speak the language and they're completely lost and they don't know what to do. And they ask us to decipher what's happening, which is what we do. But I just feel like there's more answers out there, but people just get stuck spinning their wheels because they just don't know what they don't know, really.
Well, they've never had to ask those questions. They've never been in hospital before. They've never had an aging parent that's starting to have
Right.
struggles at home or challenges. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting too, because for breadcrumbs that's coming out, I was researching some of it and I was particularly interested with the generational adaptation of retirement living in nursing homes or long-term care homes. And if you look at the data, right, nursing homes or long-term care homes have only been around since like the 50s, right? They have not been around that long. And before that, they were all encompassing. They were with people that had mental health problems. They were with, lots of different, everybody was in one kind of home. And, if you consider that the long-term care homes didn't really come about, I say 50s-ish, just to give a ballpark. And retirement homes didn't come to after, right? They're newer, not new, but newer. Really, that's only, what does that put us at 70 years? And it's like, if you consider that most of the people that we talk to have no experience. We had one great grandma in a nursing home in my town when I was a kid, when I was like 9. And that is the single experience my whole family has had. And so if they had to do that again now, they just wouldn't know because it's just not the same. And so it's going to take many generations for these nursing homes or long-term care homes and retirement to be commonplace for people to really understand what's happening. And the other part of it is that the retirement residences and the long-term care homes, the language is all interchangeable. So you could say assisted living and it could mean 600 different things. And so as the industry grows, it's going to get more confusing. So people are going to be more familiar with it because they've had more experience with it, but the industry's still growing. And so all the homes are still going to offer what they deem assisted living or what they deem, independent supportive or whatnot. And those terminologies as well, because you can't compare apples to apples as well, unless you really know what you're doing. It's really difficult for people. So when we're bringing people options, these are the top 3 retirement homes we think are going to work for you. We're comparing them apples to apples. We're not giving them what they would get from the homes, whereas this is what my home offers, and it's pricing and schedules and care and all that stuff, but they all offer something a little different and they all offer it in different ways. And so where the value from us, let alone being lovely to deal with, the value from us is really to be able to say, okay, here's everything on the same playing field. Let's look at it. And for your situation, this is why we chose these homes, right? Your low income, your 2-person transfer, your whatever it is. You can age in place, you have memory care, and it has a secured floor down the road. Lots of different reasons. And that way, not only do they get these choices and they can say, okay, and out of the 100 and some odd homes in Ottawa, I have 3. It's not so overwhelming. Let's look at these ones. And we just narrow it down for them so they can really compare based on their needs as opposed to sifting through everything that they get offered.
And then they can tour those 3 rather than touring hundreds.
Yeah, yeah. Some like it's scary. Some people, like I said, they've toured 20 or 30 homes, and even for me, that's overwhelming.
Yeah.
So yeah, we go with them on tour and we can ask those questions and advocate with them while we're on tour. And we just kind of ask questions that they wouldn't have thought about because we've been doing it a while. So
Yeah.
that's that's some of the real good value that we can offer people while they're doing it, which makes also the decision making much easier. It makes it quicker. If they're dealing with, realtors and house sales and, people in hospital or whatever, we can move really quick because we do it every single day, as opposed to someone taking it on as a whole part-time job on top of their full-time job, on top of their caregiving.
Yeah, and you have the resources. You've made the connections. You know who to call,
Yeah.
to get involved in their situation, whereas they don't, and they're sitting there going through, I'd say, the yellow pages, but that doesn't exist anymore, but Googling and Googling and Googling to find. And how do you know who's tried and true? How do you
Well,
know who is credible as a business?
well, the other thing is that people accidentally get on mailing lists, a lot of them. So people are calling, they're leaving voicemails, they're emailing, they're filling in online forms, the whole gamut. But one of the reasons I created Tea and Toast was because people would come to me in the retirement residence and they would be overwhelmed. They would think it was a right home because they could see it from their house. It was a location specific thing. And they would just be super overwhelmed and they would freeze and they would be getting follow-ups from all the homes that they've contacted, right? The homes are just doing their jobs, they're just following up. But the person had contacted so many of them that the whole situation was overwhelmed. So when we work with our clients, we're the go-to, we deal with the homes, and then we filter it so that it's, more digestible for them.
Yeah, sounds smart.
I think so.
Yeah. No, to make for caregivers to make their job, their lives easier, better. That's what we hope. That's the reason we do what we do.
It is, yeah. I mean, that's also why I formed up Elder Care Planners of Canada, because there was nothing nationally, because our industry is so new, a navigatory industry in the senior living is so new that there just wasn't any connection. And so I did that work, which
So
was
tell
trying.
us more about the Elder Care Planners of Canada, please.
Absolutely. Well, they essentially what I did was I looked through all of Google pages trying to find people, small business owners like myself, running businesses across Canada so that, Tientos, as far as I'm aware, is one of the older companies because again, the industry's new. So we're one of the older companies and we're more established and we've been, we're a little bit bigger than some of the others. And so we tend to get a lot of referrals and people call us, but not always for our area needing what we need. And so I needed someone to refer to and my team. And so I started putting everybody together and I was able to find there's 12 of us across Canada, like-minded small business that we all run our businesses in a similar fashion, like we align well. And because of that, we're able to work with other businesses on a large scale, like employee assistance programs and things like that, because we can cover all of Canada. But we can also be our own networking group because the industry again is new. And so there's not a lot of people that understand the nuances to be problem solvers and to talk to us. So we do that ourselves.
Oh, having that network is valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Like I know when I started, I was part of the Caregiving Years Training Academy, and we had a network of consultants. There were times when we just needed to connect and run situations past one another. And that's so helpful. And it sounds like that's a lot what you do through the elder care community.
Yes. Yeah, the elder care planners. Yeah. And that's the thing. We also have colleagues. We have colleagues in the industry as well, but the nuance to what we do is the specification and the navigation as well as the business running, right? Like we're also business owners, whereas a lot of our colleagues are not business owners. They work with the seniors, but they're not. So it was really good to be able to bounce a lot of things off of each other.
Well, I know even talking to you the first time, it's like you know a lot about the running of a business and just the support, and you were helpful. So you've got that whole dimension as well to really help with
I
business
would
running.
I would tell you that for most of my life, I have just figured my own stuff out. I taught myself how to be a photographer. I taught myself all the digital stuff. I mean, use it or lose it kind of scenario. So some of it's not as sharp as it used to be, but I've just taught myself it because mostly I just am impatient to wait sometimes. So I like to just, if we're lucky enough that we have the internet and we can learn pretty much anything on it. Or we can talk to other people. And that way I've just taught myself how to do a lot of the stuff. But some of it has been a long road depending on what you're, looking at, right? And as a business owner, some of the things that I've done, I should have done them other ways, but I didn't know any different, right? And so that's how I instill that into other business owners when I coach them.
Well, you tweak.
Yeah.
And also knowing what questions to ask Google is a skill. And
Yeah,
that's
that's true. Yeah.
a search engine optimization, but it's, like sometimes my husband will query something on Google, won't get the answer, and I'll query it and, well, how did you find that out? Well, it's just the way I phrased the question,
Yeah.
like, or the search.
It's
Yeah.
true. Yeah, my husband does the same thing. If it just depends on what it is, he does a lot of research online, so he's more into it on a daily basis. But between the two of us, we'll find what we need eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Teamwork.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about breadcrumbs. You've mentioned it a couple of times. It's about to be released and or launched. That's very, very exciting. And is that your first book?
So breadcrumbs, we're in a version 2 that's being
So
released.
no, this is your second book.
Technically, if you count Caregivers Advocates, my third.
Okay, it's your third book. Here we're going for 7 now.
We're getting carried away over here. Let me tell you, for someone who never thought they'd write a book. Um, yeah, I wrote Breadcrumbs original in the first of COVID. And I was just like really wanting to get something out into the world. It's hard to get the knowledge out. We have a lot of like downloads and freebies and blogs and stuff on Tea and Toast in general, but a book can usually get a little further. And so my goal was just to get something out. The book was 50 pages. It was small. It was a baby book and it was good. People enjoyed it. I'm like that no nonsense kind of just like direct but caring, so people can get the information they need. So it was really important when I was writing. And so that was really successful. And then Caregivers Advocate came along and it got delayed, which is why we just released it in July. And now Breadcrumbs version 2 is coming out in October because they got a little bit smushed together. But Breadcrumbs, we're not calling it version 2, but it is a version 2, and it's called From Home Care to Care Homes. And so the purpose is really to get information into people's hands without them having to go anywhere or talk to anyone. I found that I've become much more introverted since COVID.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, so I like to do my own stuff. And there's a lot of people out there that their parents might not be on board, or things are just starting off and they're just like looking for an easy toe dip. And so in this book, I did use some of the stuff, like this terminology and stuff that I've just reused because it's industry terminology, but I remade it. The book's 3 times the size, which is amazing. And really, I talk about strategies in there. I talk about people specific as my clients, so case studies of what people, came up against, their struggles, what kind of advice I gave them. I talk a little bit about the like I told you before, the nursing homes just coming online in the 50s, and what it's like to be a caregiver and how to take care of yourself as a caregiver, and a little bit of all that, plus all the talk and how to communicate parts in the book as well, and just how to open up those lines of communication, and it's okay to be awkward type of stuff. So I've covered it all in this book. As much as I could fathom anyway. There might be, who knows what's on the horizon. I already have like 3 other book titles. I don't know what's going to go in them, but I have the titles. And so this one I'm hoping will give people a lot of information that's digestible, but it's packed. If you don't have any information or any knowledge on this industry or what it's like to be a caregiver for a senior, there's a lot in this book.
Well, and there are those folks who don't like digital media. They don't like searching the internet. They do like the hard copy books still.
They do. Yeah, there's lots of people, and I'm also going to put out an audiobook because a lot of people like myself would prefer audio than reading. But lots of people are readers. I don't know, I don't know what that world's like, but there's lots of people that are readers, and it's just another tool for us to use because we've got a pretty good online presence. And like again, we have lots of blogs and downloads and stuff, but this is just another tool to get a little further to help people because we have clients all over the world, right? And so having this out there in the world, I'm hoping it'll help some families.
Breadcrumbs, digestible. I get it. That's good. So for folks who have an interest in tea and toast, I really encourage you to check out the website because there's some delightful photographs in there, like of your staff. I think it looks lovely with just the different poses. And so, yes, I encourage folks to check out your website. So teaandtoast.ca.
CA.
All right. Yeah. So you've got a lot going on, Amy.
We do have a lot going on. I just wanted to touch on the pictures that you mentioned because that's kind of like what our team is like. We just go and have fun and add that extra humor and light into. So I felt like the best way to meet us in our about section was to add some personality there.
Well, it comes through shining.
Great.
Yes, I loved it. Made me want to get my kettle and a cup of tea and a piece of toast.
Your own photo shoot.
Hey, yeah, I don't have the support staff to do that, but yes, that would be a lot of fun. Yeah. So is there something else you'd like to share with the listeners before we conclude?
Um, I would just say, I mean, we've touched on it multiple times, but I would really just say that like caregiving it can be difficult, and I would just encourage people to reach out. I've seen it happen in real life in real time where I've been presenting to a small group and one shared something that was going on, and then all of the others rallied to say, hey, you're not alone, or hey, you're not nuts, or hey, whatever, right? Because people feel like they're going crazy. They don't know what to do. And by sharing it, by just talking about it, you'll find more likely that people are in similar situations or have been in similar situations or are so darn grateful that you brought it up because they want to talk about it too. More and more people are going to be caregivers. There's 7+ million in Canada that are seniors, and there's like 5.5 million caregivers. And so as we age as a population, it's the norm. I feel like a lot of things need to catch up to us as caregivers, but it is the norm. So I would just encourage people to try to step out of their box and not be isolated and talk to other people.
Well, I love the word you said earlier about you may feel awkward saying something. And support groups are wonderful places because they are supposedly safe places to share your concerns, to share your fears, to share those awkward comments. And yes, they do open up a conversation. And again, you're also saying you don't want caregivers to feel that they're alone. And that's so important. And do you have involvement with support groups with what you do?
I speak to a lot of support groups. I've spoken with the Dementia Society and Parkinson's, and there's been multiple different ones. And generally, it's because people just don't know what they don't know. Again, it's hard for them to understand what I do, what the industry is. And I also bring in tidbits depending on who I'm speaking to, right? Like why, if I'm speaking to caregivers for dementia, why it might be important to have a secured floor in the building. Not that they need it at the moment, but why it might be important. And I can tailor it to them in those speaking opportunities. So it is fall. So a lot of more speakings coming up. So I'm always happy to do that.
Mm. Support groups. Our support group, well, the one that has been running for 5 years now, they initially wanted guest speakers, but We did a few guest speakers, but it's mostly just sharing, and the experts are right there, and the caregivers that have been there already, they've dealt with the situations, and they're helping the new caregivers in the group.
That's good. No, I think that's important that people have somewhere to go. Unfortunately, a lot of people just don't know that they exist or don't look into it or don't feel like they have the time, which is why it's a good alternative. If you're going to work or you're going to do something, bring it up there, right? And then there's somebody, I can guarantee there's other people who are caregiving.
Yeah. They often keep it hidden for whatever reason.
They do. Well, they're struggling, right? And nobody wants to air dirty laundry, and they might be struggling and they might be having a really hard time, but that's, I would say, that's probably some of the stigma around it, to kind of keep it to themselves. But I've also seen people struggling and it kind of trickles out, and then people just jump onto it. And then all these extra doors open for conversations and extra support happens. And it's really beautiful to see.
Yeah. Someone will say, well, that happened to me, and here's what I did. And this was years ago, but it worked for me. And yeah,
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
So it's all about communication. It's all about having those conversations in every aspect of caregiving.
I would say so.
Yeah.
Even the awkward ones.
Yeah. So let's look at the title of I'm just looking at your book, or your second book right now. So your chapter is chapter 2, and it's called When It's Time for the Talk. Turn awkward conversations into actionable elder care planning. And it's written by our very own Amy Friesen, business and caregiver coach. So the book is The Caregiver's Advocate, a complete guide to support and resources, and well worth checking out.
It was a joy to work with everyone and collaborate. It was my first collaborative book, and it's a much different process than writing a whole book. So it was really great to be a part of that.
Yeah, so there's 21 authors contributing.
Yeah. From all over the world, which is great as well.
Yeah, yeah. There's a unified message out there to support caregivers, provide resources. And that's one thing Island Treasures tries to do. And that's why I'm so grateful that you joined us today, Amy. But before you go, is there one personal tidbit you'd care to share with the listeners?
And it's a tough question. A personal tidbit. I don't know now. A lot of my stuff blends between work and personal, but I would tell you that in your personal life, even if you have experience in this industry and experience with seniors and caregiving or the retirement industry or whatnot, or a nurse or a doctor, a lot of us as professionals have this experience, but in our own lives, when we bring our experience, our families have a little hard time to digest. And so I would say to the caregivers, even though you're finding it awkward, being a professional doesn't ever make it less awkward for our own personal families. And maybe that's why we problem solve so well for other families, because other families will listen to us.
Well, it's true. It's that objectivity again.
Yeah.
When it's your own family, it's hard. It's
Yeah.
really hard.
It's difficult when it's your own family. And I mean, even in my family, I've told one of my colleagues, when we get to this point, you're having this conversation because they're too close. We're too close, even though I know what I'm talking about, but families can be close. And that's why hiring a professional does help, because that's an extra person to have, an idea of what's going on and to give you extra strategies outside of that bubble.
So you've already commissioned someone to do the difficult work for you.
I already have. Yeah.
That's awesome. Someone you trust to have those awkward conversations.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. It just should make it easier. We'll see if it does. If not, it'll be a good thing to watch.
That's funny. That's also like an advanced care plan. You've got a plan in place. So that's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how can folks reach you?
I would love if anybody wanted to reach out. Our website is tntoast.ca and our email is hello@tntoast.ca.
Hello. And are you on Facebook or Instagram or?
We are, yeah. We're on all of the channels. Tea and Toast Inc. is most of Tea and Toast Inc. is most of them, or Seniors in Ottawa, which is our Instagram.
Perfect. So, fellow Canadian, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been wonderful. It's been a slice.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Amy. Amy's dedication to improving elder care through the founding of Tea and Toast and the Elder Care Planners of Canada is truly inspiring. Through her chapter in the Caregivers Advocate and her 2 Breadcrumbs books, we can draw on her expertise as we navigate caregiving challenges. Caregiving may be a reality for any one of us at any time. And when we find ourselves dipping our toe into the waters of caregiving, will we know what to do? Having heard what Amy had to say about those awkward or difficult conversations can help us know how important having the talk is. We don't want to be guessing when our loved one is in crisis, nor do we want to feel that we're alone. Amy suggests we start the conversations, find out our options, and which questions to ask. Find support, draw on some humor, and if need be, call a professional. If you have already started your own caregiving journey and need some supports, I invite you to tap into AlongsideCaregiverConsulting.ca or Alongside Caregiver Consulting's Facebook page or Instagram account. To learn more from Amy Friesen, check out her website, teaandtoast.ca. Thank you for tuning in today, and to Amy Friesen, thank you for sharing your wisdom and experience, and for creating resources for caregivers. If you don't want to miss future episodes, be sure to subscribe to the Island Treasures podcasts. See you next episode.